This is the first lesson that I'm offering to students in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy to help them prepare for the SAT and college admission. You may find this strange that with all that I've written about modern schooling and college, that I'd be teaching an SAT prep class, but I'd like to give you a little bit of background in my own teaching history and explain why I would consider an SAT prep class to be important. All right, first of all, when I was in high school, I was the class clown in my high school. I was sent to public school. I was in all honors classes. I was smart, but I was a terrible student, and I just fooled around a lot in school because I really had no idea what education was about. My family was a working class family. My father worked in construction. My uncles and grandparents all were either farmers or construction workers. And I just had unique intellectual gifts that I was born with. So I was in honors classes in school, but education just wasn't a part of my family life. Suddenly, when I was in 10th grade and 11th grade, I earned very high scores on the PSAT and the SAT. And I had no idea what that even meant, but my teachers were shocked when they saw my scores because I wasn't a good student. And I began to take interest in the SAT because I saw that for some reason I scored very well on the SAT, even better than a lot of my classmates who were much better students than I was. And my high SAT score ended up helping me to get into a good college and doing very well in college. The SAT, just to explain what it is a test that's designed to predict whether or not students will be successful in college studies. Let me explain that again. The SAT is a test that's designed to predict whether students will be successful in college studies. Now, for me, it's funny because I was not a good high school student, and yet I earned high scores on the SAT. I wasn't a good high school student, but in college, I was actually at the top of my class. I graduated magna cum laude and was inducted into honor societies. I didn't get any awards like that in high school. And so for me, I saw that the SAT actually was an effective predictor of college success. It actually saved me because I was not even thinking about going to college until I earned high SAT scores and my guidance counselors and teachers started to encourage me to think about going to college. Who would have known that I would actually be working in education for my entire life? But the SAT in my life was a turning point in my education because it showed me that there was something different about me, and I had reason to believe that I would do well in college. The SAT, as I said, is a test that's designed to predict whether a student will be successful in college. So that's what the SAT is. It's not a test of how well you've learned all of your high school subjects. There are no science questions. There are no history questions on the SAT. It's a test that focuses on language skills and mathematical skills, and that's it. And the skills and the questions that it looks for in the test are not like questions that you face in any of your high school studies. It's a unique test. It looks for different things than your normal high school tests look for, and you have to study and prepare to do well on the SAT because it's a unique test that you can prepare for and do well on. So the SAT is a predictor of college success. How can one prepare for the SAT? Well, what's funny is when I began studying classics and really got into the classical liberal arts, I was hired, in one of my first teaching jobs, I was hired at a private school. And they asked me if I would prepare the high school students to score well on their SATs. And so I was the SAT prep teacher at that private school. And as I started to prepare to teach SAT prep, I spent some time researching and learning more about the SAT test to see how I could help prepare the students to do well. And what I found was that the SAT, what it's really looking for, are the kinds of skills that are learned by students who study the classical liberal arts. It's looking for language skills. It's looking for critical thinking and reasoning skills. It's looking for reading comprehension skills, which require some knowledge of principles of rhetoric that allow us to read writings of other people and draw out of them the main ideas and the points that they're trying to make. Those skills that the SAT looked for, I realized they're skills of the classical liberal arts. And the same thing was true in mathematics. While students were working to try and race through all of the maths, they were getting into trigonometry and calculus and all these. None of those higher studies were even tested on the SAT. What the SAT wanted to know is if you understand how to solve problems that you've never faced before using information that you've learned in the past. So what was interesting to me about the SAT was that people know, experts in education know, that what predicts success in college studies are the kinds of skills that one gains in classical liberal arts studies. So for me to teach SAT prep was actually very easy because I knew those skills because I taught grammar and reasoning and rhetoric and literature and philosophy, and I could also teach mathematics because I was studying the classical liberal arts. So how can you prepare for the SAT? As crazy as it may seem, the best way you can prepare for the SAT is to study the classical liberal arts, okay? Don't think that the modern high school curriculum is actually preparing kids to do well on the SAT. It's not. If you go and look at the local high school SAT scores, they'll have students earning the lowest scores and the highest scores. It has nothing to do with the modern high school curriculum. Just to give you an idea, if we look at SAT scores and the way that the SAT score, I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, but basically you take the SAT and you get a score. The highest score, perfect score, is a 1600. The lowest you can score is a 400. The average SAT score in America is around 1060, okay? It's about halfway up the chart. 1060 is the average SAT score. So you can see that the majority of high school students, and almost, when we look at the numbers, almost all students in America are public school students. The numbers of private school and homeschooled students are very low. Almost all American students, if you look at the statistics, are public school students. And the public schools are basically preparing students with a modern curriculum that earns an average score of only 1060. That's really very poor, all right? There's no way that a student with a good education should score only 1060, okay? And we'll look at a little bit more about that in a minute. But the modern curriculum, for all the concern that people have about giving their kids a modern education, making sure they study math and algebra and trigonometry and calculus and English classes and literature classes, it doesn't even prepare students well for the SAT, which is as important in college admissions as their grade point average, which summarizes all of their high school studies. The SAT is very important, and modern curriculum does not prepare kids to do well on the SAT. The average score in our country is only 1060, which is very low. Now, one of the concerns that I have about standardized tests, about any kinds of standardized tests, is that there are challenges that Christians face on standardized tests. I can give you a good example from one of my own children. One of my children was in second grade. We don't really pay attention to grades, but when it came time to take a standardized test, his age put him in second grade. And there's a language part of the test, and as he's going through the test is asking him to read something or think of a certain word that's given, and then to select a picture that shows that term. And one of the words that was given to my son was cinema. And a cinema is a movie theater. Now, my children, we don't go to the movies. In our Christian life, we're not hanging out at movie theaters. And my son, who is 8 years old, he didn't even know what a cinema was. And what in the world does that have to do with the English language? The English language, testing whether or not my son was skilled in English, should not depend on whether or not he knows the meaning of the word cinema, okay? And one challenge that Christians face on standardized tests is that the culture and the normal life of the society at large is taken for granted. The way that children are being taught, the experiences that they have, the way their families operate, the way their schools operate, a lot of those things are taken for granted and assumed by people who make standardized tests. And Christian students have a challenge that they need to overcome, because they need to actually understand what's different about their life and their experience, so that when they enter into standardized tests, they can actually understand what the tests are talking about. Because the assumption of the test makers is that the 17-year-old student sitting down to take this test has certain experiences which many Christian students simply don't have, because their family culture is not the normal secular family culture. Okay, so there are challenges that Christians face that I'm going to talk about in this SAT prep class and help you as a Christian student to overcome. So that's another reason why SAT prep is important, to be taught by a Christian teacher to Christian students, especially to Christian homeschool or private school students, because we have unique challenges that we face on these standardized tests, and we need to be able to overcome them. Okay? And then lastly, about scoring and goals. Now, it's true, your SAT score is going to be determined by how hard and intelligently you work in your studies. There's no easy way around it. In my case, I told you I was a bad student, but I got a high SAT score. The reason why was because in my life, I had some unique experiences that other students didn't have. And those experiences actually helped me in my studies and on the SAT. For example, I told you that my father worked in construction. But one thing that my father and my uncles did as a hobby was they owned race cars. And I grew up around auto racing. So when I was a kid, my family was working on cars. We had a big garage at our house. I was always in the garage learning about the cars, learning how the cars worked. I was at the races. So I learned a lot of information about math and physics because of auto racing. I learned a lot of principles of physics because of helping my father and my uncles in construction. And I also played sports. And I learned a lot of mathematics. I learned things like statistics and a lot of physics from actually playing sports. I'd want to know, for example, if I was pitching after the game, I'd want to know what my statistics were. And I learned how to figure out statistics. I learned how to figure out my batting average and my earned run average as a pitcher. And I could figure these things out very quickly because I was interested in them, and my participation in sports helped me to understand those ideas. I had to learn how to throw a curveball, or how to run faster, or how to hit better. And to figure those things out, I would talk to coaches or read articles as a teenager that actually taught me a lot of principles of mathematics and natural sciences. So even though I didn't do well in my high school classes, my experiences outside of the classroom taught me a lot that was actually more useful on the SAT than the lessons in my high school classrooms. And there's no way to get around the fact that we have to study hard to prepare for the SAT. I was lucky that my life experiences helped me in that way. No one would ever have thought that things would work the way they did, and I was just lucky. But since you may not have those experiences, and you may depend on academic work to learn the knowledge and skills that you're going to need when you take the SAT, you're going to have to work hard in your studies. And like I said, what the SAT is looking for are skills that are learned in the classical liberal arts. Okay? Yes, you do need to study algebra because it's on the SAT. And yes, you do need to study modern geometry because it's on the SAT. But that's it. There's no trigonometry, there's no calculus, there's no history, no science, no Spanish. None of that stuff is on the SAT. Okay? Language skills, reasoning skills, reading comprehension skills, and algebra, arithmetic, and geometry are the only subjects tested on the SAT. And you have to work in those studies in order to do well on the SAT. So there's no way around the need to work hard to figure out where your SAT score is going to be. Now, based on your life experiences, based on your education in general, if you were to take the SAT today, if you're 15, 16, 17 years old, if you were to take the SAT today, you would probably land in a certain range based upon your education and experience. And it's not likely that you would be able, within a year or so, to radically change your score. Okay, so if you're 17 years old or 18 years old, you're pretty much set in a range where you're going to stay on the SAT. But because the SAT is a special test, if you learn how the SAT works, how you can prepare for the SAT, how you should take the SAT, how you should think about SAT questions, all special, I don't want to say tricks, because that sounds kind of silly, but there are techniques and strategies that can help you to raise your score, 100, 200 points based on where you are. You're not going to go from you're not going to go from 800 up to 1500. You're not going to raise your score like that. But if you can score 1200, we can get that score to 1300 or maybe 1400 if we have a year or two to work. If you're scoring, around 1000, we can get that up to 1100. And that bump 100 points, maybe 200 points if you work really hard, that's a significant improvement in your SAT score. So where you're at in your education, the kind of student you've been, your life experience, the kind of things you do, your culture, mentally, things like that are going to determine where you are, generally speaking, in SAT scores. But what you can do is work to raise your score another 100, 150 points, and that's a significant change in your final score. Now, just to talk generally about scoring, okay, like I said, this test is scored and you can earn between a 400 and a 1600. 1600 is a perfect score. The way they get that score is there are two basic parts of the test. One part is language arts, reading and reasoning. That's one part. And the other part is mathematics. Each part you can earn 800 possible points. Add those together, and that gives you your SAT score. So you're going to get between 200 and 800 on the language and reasoning section, and you're going to get between 200 and 800 on the math section. And when you add those together, you'll have your SAT score. Now, if you're talking about going to college, you have to talk about it realistically. All right? Like I said, the average SAT score in our country is around 1060. That's very low. If you were to take a selective university, and when I talk about colleges, I'm talking about selective colleges and universities. You can go to a community college or a county college, and you don't even need to get accepted. You just sign up, pay the tuition, and go to college. So you don't need a high SAT score to go to your local community college. You can just sign up, pay tuition, and start college classes. You know, the community and county colleges are the lowest, and then they go up from there. There are local small colleges, and as you go up, you get into higher and better, more selective colleges where it's more and more difficult to get admitted to those schools. Now, it depends on what your goals are. I really don't believe it's a good idea to seek a degree from a poor college. You know, if you want to go to college and get a degree because you have goals in business and you want to pursue a career and you want to be impressive and you want to have an impressive resume, and then you need an impressive degree. That's the point of going to a selective college. Not only that, but one of the main benefits of going to college is that you make a lot of connections at college, connections with your future career. Your professors, for example, at a college have connections in the field. For example, one of my professors was in education. He was one of the directors of the state curriculum. So if I wanted to work in public education, one of my professors, who was a mentor of mine, could have easily placed me into an administrative job in the public schools in New Jersey where I went to college. But I wasn't interested in public schooling, so that didn't necessarily help me. But that's a way that the college you attend, one of the main benefits it offers is connections. And the bigger and better the colleges are, the more connections they make available to you professionally. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go to a low quality college or university. If you're going to go to college, you need to aim for a selective university because there are real benefits. They have better facilities, they have better professors, they have better resources, they can give you more connections in professional life, and you're going to have your college degree from the school that you graduate from for the rest of your life. And the name on that degree is significant. If you go to a well-known selective college, anyone who learns what school you attended is going to know whether it was a selective and prestigious college or not. You're going to have that degree your whole life. So if you want to aim for admission to a selective college, you need to realize that the standards are high. All right? Just to give you an example, the University of Notre Dame, which is one of the best and most selective Catholic universities, the average SAT score for students admitted to the University of Notre Dame was 1445. That was the average score for students admitted to the University of Notre Dame, I believe, in 2019. So when you start talking about going to college, if you're going to talk about a selective college, you need to realize that anyone can apply to the University of Notre Dame, but the quality of student who's actually being admitted to the University of Notre Dame has an average SAT score of 1445. The average American SAT score is 1060. These kids cannot go to Notre Dame. And if you have an average SAT score, you can cross those schools off the list because it's just not possible for you to be admitted there. All right, so if you have goals to pursue a certain career or go to a certain school, you need to look at what their average SAT scores are for admitted students, and you need to work to earn that kind of a score, or you're just off the list right from the get-go. Okay, now the schools, they like to advertise these scores. So Notre Dame is very proud of its average SAT score, and it will advertise that score on its website. They're not going to admit students who bring their scores down unless those students offer some other benefits to the universities. People will complain that a university like Notre Dame will admit football players, for example, who have lower SAT scores. But those football players are capable of bringing millions and millions of dollars in publicity to the university, and it's worth admitting those students for the benefit of the whole university. So that the university might accept a student who has an SAT score of 1100 because he's a star football player, because that star football player is going to put Notre Dame football on prime time television, where it costs millions of dollars to advertise, and Notre Dame is going to have a spot for 3 hours on TV that it would never be able to afford if it just had to pay for advertising. So one of the reasons why a university will admit students with lower scores is because they bring other benefits. But the universities are not going to admit students who bring their average scores down and don't offer any significant benefits to the university. So if there is a school that you're interested in, let's say that, here I am in North Carolina. Let's say that my son wanted to go to Duke University here in North Carolina. What we would need to do is get in touch with Duke University, go on their website, go to their admissions information, find out things like what's the average SAT score of students being admitted to that school, or even more specifically, what's the score of students being admitted to the particular program that my child is interested in, or I'm interested in. If I want to study nursing at the University of Southern California, and they have a great nursing program, I need to learn what the requirements are and what the averages are for students getting admitted into that nursing program. And then I need to figure out if I can reach those numbers, and if I'm in range, then I have to work to get myself into the best position possible. So if you're interested, and one of your goals is to gain admission to a selective college or university, one of the things that you're going to have to take care of is figuring out where your SAT score needs to be and then working to get it there. All right? And if you've got 6 months, you're going to be stuck. But if you've got 1, 2, 3 years where you can work on these things, focus on improving your overall education by taking challenging courses and working hard in your studies, while also learning how to prepare for the SAT, you can raise your chances of getting admitted into a more selective school or program. All right? That's the goal of our work in SAT prep. I can't give you a score you don't deserve. I can't help you earn a score that you haven't worked for. But if you put in a certain amount of work and your goals are realistic, and you need help getting an extra 100 points or 120 points or 80 points, SAT prep teaching can help you to do that. And we'll work through that in this course as we go through. So what is the SAT? You should understand that the SAT is a test that's used to predict college success for high school students. Many students who have good grades in college have good grades for reasons that are not impressive. For example, if you have a student in high school whose parents are all over him with studies, they make sure he goes to school on time, they make sure he does his homework every night, they check his homework, they make sure everything is perfect, they help him study, they talk to his teachers, they organize his the parents are all over the student. He may get straight A's and be totally unprepared for the challenges that he faces when he's alone, away from home at college. And the SAT will catch that kid. Okay? There may be another student whose parents are divorced. He has a very difficult life. His family is poor. He has to work a part-time job just to help his mother pay the bills. He doesn't get much time to study. He's got difficult circumstances. His grades are, okay, but he doesn't have much opportunity to do things. And that kid can get a good SAT score, and there can be this glimmer of hope and promise that this boy, though his numbers may not be that impressive, has something in him that promises success in college. Okay? If we were to take that boy out of his difficult circumstances and put him into a great university with great professors, great resources, none of the distractions that he had in his life, and give him a scholarship because he deserves this opportunity. The SAT can help find kids like that and reward them for gifts and abilities and experiences that they have that help them that may not be visible in their high school transcript or in their GPA. So there's more to college admission than just the strict numbers of what a student does with his classes and his grades and things like that. Colleges know that many kids get good grades because their parents do the work for them, and other kids get lower grades because they have circumstances that make it difficult for them to concentrate on schoolwork. The SAT helps with things like that. How can you prepare? Study the classical liberal arts, study modern algebra, study modern geometry, and study SAT prep. That's how you can prepare to get the highest possible SAT score. Understand the challenges Christians face on standardized tests. This is especially true of homeschool students, right? Think about what I just said about how parents can actually help students too much and actually put them in a position where they're not becoming independent students who are able to work on their own. And when they go away from home to college, they wouldn't do well because they've never learned how to be responsible for their own studies and learning. That's a challenge that students face, and standardized tests will find that out, because the kind of questions that you're going to be answered on a standardized test are not questions that mommy and daddy can help with. You're going to face difficult questions that you've never seen before. You're going to have to read articles on the SAT about topics that you've never studied before, and you're going to have challenges, and you need to learn how to overcome those challenges. And then lastly, understanding scoring, that there's two parts to the SAT, language and math, that each part has a maximum of 800 points. The total of those two parts of the test gives you an SAT score with a maximum of 1,600, that your current state of studies and experience is going to put you in a certain range, and the goal, while you have some time left to prepare, is to try and raise your score as much as possible, within your range, okay? And usually 100 points is given as a fair expectation, where if you do some work to prepare for the SAT, you can be able to raise that score 100 points or so within, let's say a year of preparation. So I hope that's a helpful introduction to the SAT. Again, the SAT was an experience that was important in my life. Whenever I taught in private schools, I was always asked to be the SAT prep teacher, and I really enjoyed doing that. I helped students earn great scores, had a couple students earn perfect scores, and I know that by learning and understanding the test, preparing specifically for the test, and avoiding problems that the test is designed to catch, can allow students, especially Christian students, to get the highest possible SAT scores, which, if your goals include college attendance, and college attendance really should aim at the most selective college possible, then raising your SAT score needs to be a priority in your high school studies. Okay? I hope that's a helpful introduction. We're going to go through all of these things in detail. I'm going to help you understand how the test works, all the details of how it's arranged, what it contains, what all the parts are made up of, how the scoring works. I'm going to lead you through the study of every different part of the test, the different types of questions that you have to answer, what skills you need to know and practice in order to raise your SAT scores, and then even what to expect when you go and register and take your SAT test, how to get ready, how to get registered, things like that. I'll help you with the whole entire process. And this year I'll be publishing one video a week on SAT prep, which I encourage you to work through. What can you do in the meantime? The one thing that I recommend is that you ask a parent, or if you're a parent, that you look into buying a book, an SAT prep book, and I'll post the actual book that I recommend. It's the official test prep book that's published by the College Board, who actually makes and administers the SAT test, but they publish a preparation book that usually has 10 or so full practice tests included in the book, and I'll assign those practice tests to the kids or to you as the students as we go through the course, and we'll have an idea of what your scores are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and even as I go through the course for all students, I can also help you individually with your specific needs, your strengths and weaknesses, and how we can raise your scores based on the results of your practice tests. Okay, so that's my goal for SAT prep. That's why I'm offering this class to students in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I hope that you work hard and reach out to me when you need help, because I'm willing to help you succeed in this, and you can do it. Okay? God bless.